She kind of shut me out.
Euphoria. Them superpowers get neutralized. I can only watch in silence. The famous actor we once knew is looking paranoid and now spiraling. You're moving just like a degenerate. Heavy antic is feeling distasteful.
Shauna, I'm good.
Now let me say I'm the biggest hater. I hate the way that you walk, the way that you talk. I hate the way that you dress. I hate the way that you sneak this. If I catch flight, it's gonna be direct. We hate the bitches you fuck, cause they confuse themselves with real women. Then notice I said we, it's not just me. I'm what the coach I'm feeling. How many more fairy tale stories about your life?
Hello, mudbeards and fellow wilderness survivors, and today we're going to be bringing you a video touching on the furious case of Shauna Shipman. Before I go any further, I want to once again shout out the intro edit that was made not by me, but by a fellow Yellowjackets fan named Cobbs. I really hope I pronounced that name right. You may have seen one of their edits on the channel before in one of my recent Yellowjackets videos. Either way, they kill it at what they do, so feel free to go show them some love. Because this edit you saw in this intro was actually what kind of inspired this entire video, or at least kicked it into gear. See, today I wanted to touch on the subject of a character in the show Yellowjackets named Shauna Shipman. For those who don't know, she's one of the many soccer players who were stranded out there in the Canadian wilderness and stuck out there for 19 months. They ended up resorting to cannibalism, and the story slowly takes place to show how they devolved to that point, while simultaneously following the adult timeline and showing some of the survivors and how they deal with some of the trauma and cope with those things on a day-to-day life. The character in question is played by two different actresses who are very talented. The younger version of the character is played by Sophie Nélise, who, if you haven't heard of her already, you definitely will hear soon because she is going places. And the adult version of the character is played by a Melanie Lynskey, who, if you've been a fan of film and TV, you've likely seen her in many places. These actors perfectly balance all of the emotions that the character would convey dealing with a lot of the trauma and situations that they are dealing with. They bring the character to life in a way that seamlessly allows us as an audience to really attach to them and their journey. For some of us, we even root for them despite the fact that they are not relatively the best person morally. That being said, the rest of the video will be touching on some major spoilers for the characters, so if you haven't really seen Yellowjackets, I recommend tuning out now because she is a pivotal character and moves the plot in a lot of different directions. But anyways, to preface, I'm gonna go ahead and address the elephant in the room and say right away that Shauna is not my favorite character. That being said, she's far from being my least favorite character. I would even go as far as to argue she is one of the most entertaining characters to watch on screen, up there with none other than Lottie Matthews. But they're both entertaining for very different reasons. And if you think about it, those reasons help divide the show into the two different directions or the fork in the road that it has in the first place. See, the character of Lottie Matthews represents a side of the show that is more spiritual, that touches on the idea that something out there known as the entity, the wilderness, is actually affecting the girls in some way, shape, or form, maybe even haunting them in the adult timeline. However, on the other side of the spectrum, you have Shauna, who is not a firm believer in the wilderness, but is actively affected by it if it does exist, and or is actively pushing all the girls into believing in it, without even intentionally doing so. The series kind of opened up letting us see a glimpse into the future, and that glimpse showed a famous scene all Yellowjackets fans refer to as the pit girl scene. It indicated that the crash had left the girls in such a devolved state that they ended up hunting each other down for food, which is far different than someone dying and you just happen to eat their body to survive. No, we see something went on out there that the girls ended up developing their own culture. Now, as the story progresses, we see the girls slowly get to this point, but if Lottie is an example of a character who is touching the wilderness, and Shauna's character is what ends up bringing the violent aspect to the girls' culture while they're out there in the wilderness. And while she may have not always been necessarily violent, she has always been a character who is envious and is ready for confrontation. See, in the beginning of the story, we get glimpses of her relationship with Jackie. Jackie very much ruling her life in a very inadvertent way. Shauna kind of letting it happen because she admires Jackie and is envious of her as a person. However, it's sort of a Stockholm Syndrome situation because at the same time, while she does have a lot of admiration for Jackie, she also has a lot of jealousy, which in turn builds a little bit of resentment towards her. This resentment boiled up to the point that showed us our first glimpse of Shauna's moral alignment, in the fact that she ended up sleeping with Jackie's boyfriend, Jeff, inadvertently leading to her pregnancy out in the wilderness. Now, while they're out in the wilderness, all the girls are affected in different ways that kind of shows how the characters could reach the point that we saw. But the only character who is truly following the human story without being affected by any of the craziness going on is Shauna. Think about it. For the characters that get the most screen time, you have Ty, who has another personality that's taking over, and while one side is completely logical, the other side is doing some crazy stuff with the eyeless man. You have Lottie, who's very much in touch with the wilderness. You have Natalie, who also isn't a believer in the wilderness, but she hasn't been pushed to the point where her entire personality has shifted due to the dramatic events out there. Not yet anyways. Or at least I should say not to the extent that Shauna has. See, Shauna is the perfect character to follow if we want to see the girls being pushed to their absolute breaking point. Each character represents the girl's journey downwards into this horrible cannibalistic cult. But Shauna's character represents a relatively normal person and how being stuck in certain situations can really heighten the worst aspects of ourselves. See, it'd be foolish to say that the wilderness had turned Shauna into a bad person. There's already enough proof to know that she isn't necessarily the best morally beforehand, so safe to say that going out there in the wilderness and being stranded would push anybody to a more aggressive mental state. But now you have to couple in the fact that Shauna went through some extra special circumstances while she was stranded out there. See, Shauna had to feel responsible for potentially getting Jackie killed, having gotten into a heated argument over Shauna sleeping with her boyfriend, right before refusing to leave and sending Jackie out, inevitably leading to her freezing to death. Then you have Shauna dealing with said grief while being pregnant with her best friend's boyfriend's child, while being stranded out in the middle of the wilderness in the middle of winter, trapped in a small little isolated cabin, barely eating anything, with a bunch of girls who, from her perspective, have all lost their minds and started worshiping the dirt. But they're not even just worshiping the dirt. They're getting involved, getting all close to your belly, messing with your kid, talking about what they're gonna do with your kid. Shauna already has a fear for giving birth out there in the wilderness, and giving all these conditions, it's already getting rough for her. Added to the fact that all these girls are hovering over her like a pack of hyenas, with no way to escape. The one time she even tried to walk out, she ended up getting stuck in a snowstorm, and it ended up inducing the labor in the first place. Now, I won't touch too much on the subject of how it transpired with the labor, but we all know that was a traumatic event for her as well. The effects that can have on the human psyche alone can be pretty severe, let alone the fact of the circumstances that are surrounding that aspect. I recommend, if you really need more evidence, looking up how postpartum depression or psychosis can affect people. But moving forward, now we've reached the point where Shauna has had to eat two people she seemed to have genuinely cared about, her being the initial butcher of both, once they were about to be eaten, I mean. Dealing with all of this hardship, even beating up the leader of the entire group altogether and putting her in an almost coma, the leader decides it's time for a new leader, and this leader ends up choosing Natalie. So Shauna, who already felt invisible living in Jackie's shadow, had to deal with the attention given to them by all the girls, but seemingly mostly given to her baby. And a few days after giving birth to said baby, she goes back to seemingly being invisible again. Now, Natalie is a character who has a lot of reasons to make Shauna upset. Some not necessarily justified, but some Shauna's reasonably angry for. Let's go ahead and start with the fact that before the crash, Natalie seemed to live a life that Shauna would have wanted to live. A rebel, someone who dons a leather jacket, does whatever she wants, and doesn't care. While Shauna lived in someone else's shadow. We already know she's envious in the first place, and their relationship wasn't really the best. Touch back to when they got in an argument the night of the party, Shauna stepped in to try to defend Natalie, probably just being fake about it just to egg the argument on, but Natalie steps in telling her to shut up.
Shauna, I don't need you to defend me.
We know Shauna has a rage inside her, and while back then she could have bottled it a little bit better, we know that probably irked her a little bit. Now let's jump to the fact that she was donned leader, which sucks because if Shauna had been a little bit quicker, she would have killed Natalie before Travis would have been able to stop them, likely resulting in, presumably Shauna's perspective, her being chosen as leader. Now, with everything Shauna has dealt with and how isolated she must feel, she has to look at all the girls worship either Natalie for being a leader or Lottie for being in touch with the wilderness. And while she did sort of isolate herself, it's not like any of the girls are reaching out and trying to talk to her. At least that was until Melissa came along. Melissa we didn't know too much about, but from the season 2 lines that we did get from her, she was pretty combative and pretty aggressive. This season, they obviously amplified that aspect of her character, and her and Shauna have begun what we call a villain arc. And a villain arc is pivotal in a show like this. And if you really look at the constructive narrative so far, no other character could have represented this villain arc other than Shauna. Maybe Van, but I'll save that for a different video. Point is, Shauna was the best character to represent the girl's aggressive side. And season 1 already hinted to us a lot of this villain aspect of her character with the adult timeline. See, I want to once again reference how talented Melanie Lynskey is at bringing the character of Shauna into life. What could be read as a suburban mom with a little bit of an edge quickly becomes apparent that they have a little bit of a chaotic side to them. We see throughout the first season that Shauna is a relatively paranoid and violent person. She seeks adventure, she seeks the chaos, she seeks the wildness of the wilderness. Now take a soldier who is sent to war, trained for combat, put through psychological tests to see if they can actually push through, and maybe dealing with some horrible hardships of people who are actively trying to kill them because it is war, because it is an obligation in some way. A lot of those soldiers will still come back with severe PTSD. Unable to adapt to a normal lifestyle because of the chaos and the life and death circumstances they lived on a day-to-day basis out there, wherever they were deployed. Now take a high school kid who is relatively still young, while also affected by an early pregnancy, and then thrust her into all of the circumstances that she has dealt with out there. Not one of the other characters feels this seeking towards the wilderness other than Lottie, but again, two different reasons. Shauna is the best example of someone who can't really adapt back to normal life because of how much they adjusted to the chaos, to the life and death nature of the wilderness. If she could have her way, she'd go back out to the wilderness and maybe just live out there with her family. Either way, I can't fathom what that would do to your psyche, so it's just one of the many aspects that could help explain some of her more severe actions. Maybe narratively it would help if some of the other characters were also dealing with some similar aspects, instead of dealing with either another personality or hearing things from the wilderness, or even hallucinations. But it also gives the actors of Sophie Nélisse and Melanie Lynskey a lot to work with and helps us really focus on what they can bring to the table in regards to post-traumatic stress. So, after all this, I hope that you can find a new appreciation for Shauna as a character. She is played brilliantly by two amazing actors. Her character is helping push the plot towards the direction that was teased towards the very beginning, in a way that I'd argue is somewhat natural because there is evidence building up to this side of her. I do not think you're supposed to like her character necessarily. I think you're supposed to appreciate her character and what they represent on this journey of the story Yellowjackets is trying to tell. If we can watch a high school character become a severe drug overlord, then we can appreciate a high school kid becoming a crazy cannibalistic cult lady. But maybe there's aspects of her character that genuinely just aren't delivered well or ruin her character as a whole. And if there are, please let me know. While there are some narrative elements of the series at the moment that I don't necessarily agree with, I still appreciate the characters and all of their individual journeys they're going on, and Shauna, I feel like, deserves her flowers. I'm here for the villain arc. I want to see her be more violent. I want to see her be more crazy. And I want to see her get her comeuppance in the very end. We already have other characters representing the more innocent side of dealing with all of these events. We need a character who really embraces the darkness of the wilderness. Who better to do so than our favorite furious feline, Shauna Shipman. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I really just wanted to highlight what an amazing character Shauna is and how they are amazingly played by some absolutely spectacular actors. And while I'm waiting till the season is completely over to provide a review, I do think it's interesting how many people seem to misunderstand Shauna as a character. Because in my eyes, she is one of the most pivotal characters in the entire story. So once again, shout out Cobbs for the amazing edit, shout out Sophie Nélisse and Melanie Lynskey for bringing an amazing character to life, and shout out the Yellowjackets writers for hopefully staying true to what they're trying to build as a narrative. Either way, I truly do want to know if there's any aspects to her character that I may have missed. But otherwise, thanks for showing your support, really appreciate it. A like and a share really help with these kind of videos. And remember, don't shoot. Remember, a like and a share really do help with these kind of videos and help me grow as a creator. But otherwise, have a good rest of your day, enjoy some Yellowjackets, and don't feed your family some rabbit. Yes.